What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Monday, everybody. I hope you all had a lovely weekend. First up, let's talk about key economic and financial developments from the last few days in China. We have more data pointing to the accelerating trend which we have been noting over the last few months. This, of course, is the trend of state-owned enterprises stepping up to maintain economic growth in the People's Republic of China. While useful in the short term, in the medium to long term, it means a more dominant state-owned sector and all the damage to economic dynamism that entails. According to state-run Xinhua, in January, revenue of centrally controlled SOEs reached 3 trillion RMB, approximately $470 billion, up 12.4% year on year. Total profit of these enterprises stood at 185.27 billion RMB, climbing 11.3% compared with last January. Total net profit grew 10.2% year on year to approximately 140 billion RMB. Tax and fee payments of these enterprises came in at about 350 billion RMB, almost 20% higher than a year before. So we can see here a true advance from state-owned enterprises moving in as many private enterprises across industries are experiencing tremendous difficulties. Okay, next up, Chinese financial media outlet Caixin reports that US EV maker Tesla Inc. plans to expand the production of electric vehicles components at its Shanghai-based plant in an effort to meet growing demand for exports, according to a recent environmental impact report, which also says that to achieve the goal, it will need to add production workshops, hire additional workers, and extend operating hours. Caixin writes that Tesla raked in $13.8 billion in revenue from the Chinese market last year, up an incredible 108% year on year, according to a filing with the company, which it filed with the US Securities and Exchange Commission a few weeks ago now. The China figure accounted for nearly a quarter of what it earned around the globe last year. And one more development to touch on, Chinese technology giant and WeChat owner Tencent Holdings Limited has acquired Canadian game studio Inflection Games from its parent company Improbable Worlds Limited, which develops simulation technologies for the industries of gaming, defense, energy, and finance. According to a statement from the studio itself, Inflection, this is yet another move in Tencent's plans to acquire more gaming developers in overseas markets. Inflection is working on its first game, Nightingale. As expected, the outbreak situation in Hong Kong, one of the world's most densely populated cities, has further deteriorated over the weekend, and now local experts are predicting that new infections could peak at an incredible 180,000 cases a day by this coming month in March. Hong Kong has a relatively old population and very low vaccination rates. The healthcare system is being described by local commentators as overwhelmed, with a capacity at over 100%. Indeed, on yesterday, a representative of the Hospital Authority Employees Alliance, speaking to Hong Kong media, expressed, quote, "The medical system is completely overwhelmed," end quote, explaining that the bodies of dead residents and patients have been stored on gurneys in the hallways or beds at public hospitals because many mortuaries are too full. According to official data, the city is nearing 100 deaths a day. The Special Administrative Region government announced late last week that Hong Kong will roll out compulsory testing for COVID-19 starting in mid-March for its 7.4 million residents. Chief Executive Carrie Lam announced the following day that stringent rules will be in place until mid-April, with schools breaking early for summer and resuming in August. On the mainland, state-run Xinhua wrote over the weekend that Hong Kong is easing regulations, which keeps aspects of administration at arm's length from Beijing, as well as other emergency provisions which give more authority to the central government, as well as the SAR government. The Hong Kong Special Administrative Region government on Thursday said that it had relaxed legal requirements on licensing, registration and applications, among others, quote, in order to fully leverage the mainland's support in combating the COVID-19 epidemic." End quote. With the global market shift towards electric vehicles in recent years and a trend that's only going to intensify in the future, demand for a key input, lithium, has exploded in recent years, with some commentators calling the commodity white gold. This month, the spot price of lithium metal in the Chinese market reached 2 million RMB, approximately $315,000 per ton for the first time, more than 4 times what it cost a year ago. Indeed, Chinese mining companies, battery manufacturers and car makers are all on the hunt to secure a steady supply of the material. Analysts have observed that investments into upstream and battery recycling activities show that companies are looking to create a so-called closed-loop supply chain, which is more sustainable and can also have political advantages. This has all contributed to China's growing dominance in the supply chain. As such, like many commodities of the past, it has morphed into a geopolitical consideration and now acts as yet another area of contention between China and Western and Asian competitors. One senior fellow at the Washington-based Center for Strategic International Studies think tank, Ryan Berg, in a report published late last year expressed, quote, "These trends indicate that control of the lithium industry could reap major benefits in the future, which will likely increase the geopolitical contention between great powers." End quote. Last week, one commodities specialist at Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post wrote that most major economies have already elevated lithium's importance to that of a strategic mineral in the supply chain, while experts say that the metal's mining and refinery has been further politicized amid rising geopolitical tensions and an ongoing supply chain crisis. Observing that China's 14th five-year plan, which set the tone for the country's development from 2021 to 25, highlighted the need to create more resilient industrial supply chains while enhancing the nation's competitiveness in emerging technology sectors such as electric vehicles. US President Joe Biden also recently ordered a 100-day review of the domestic supply chain late last year, expressing that China's dominance in lithium refinery, quote, presents a critical vulnerability to the future of the US domestic auto industry, end quote. In early February, Panjiva Research, that's PANJIVA Research, expressed, quote, "Capacity revolves around key sources like Chile and China, which means that simmering trade tensions between China and the US are coming into play," end quote. It hasn't been all smooth sailing for Chinese firms, however. We may remember back in January, Chinese carmaker BYD's $61 million lithium mining deal with Chile, home to 42% of the world's known reserves, was suspended by a local court. We discussed it at the time. This is a space that continues to evolve and develop, and we will continue to watch it here on China Update. And last up, the Evergrande Housing Crisis. If you guys are enjoying the content, don't forget to hit the like button. It's a huge help. If you're watching for the first time and you're enjoying the content, you get some value from the content, maybe consider subscribing. Okay, over the weekend, China financial expert at Peking University, Michael Pettis, speaking on the Chinese housing crisis, touched on several major themes that we have been following closely on China Update for months now. Professor Pettis has a brilliant way of boiling complex ideas down to their most basic and digestible form. I wanted to end today's video by looking at his most recent thoughts on the housing crisis situation. So far, regulators are not responding to the crisis among private sector property developers by easing their access to credit, except indirectly by forcing banks to expand mortgages, even as home buying interest declines. Instead, according to Professor Pettis, the credit easing takes place mainly in the form of transfers of market share from the private sector to the state-owned property developers, another theme that we've been discussing a lot in recent months. This also makes it easier for the regulators to direct a larger share of new building towards low-income rentals. This is a deep dive we did about a week or so ago as well, the rental market. More low-income housing would definitely be a good thing for China. Cheap housing for the poor is one of the most effective ways to rebalance income depending on how it is funded, of course. Now, when he says depending on how it is funded, what he means is, are public houses being funded through the liquidation of state assets, in which case it is a transfer from the government to households, or is it funded through taxes on households and or debt, in which case there is redistribution within the household sector, but there is not a transfer from government to households. Professor Pettis continues to explain, quote, "But you can't ignore a problem for 10 to 20 years and then just hope that it will somehow go away. The facts remain that prices of Chinese real estate are probably 2 to 3 times what can economically be justified, and that roughly 60% or more of the wealth of households in China consists of the value of their homes." End quote. You can't create a meaningful number of cheap apartments and hope to segregate the price impact from the rest of the market. If Chinese can buy reasonably priced apartments, that will sharply reduce demand for similar apartments at 2 to 3 times the price. More generally, he continues, there has never been a real estate bubble that hasn't eventually adjusted, even if authorities are able to postpone the adjustment for decades, because, quote, "at some point, rising real estate prices themselves undermine the economy. One way or another, in other words, real estate prices will adjust downwards in China, and this can happen quickly, as occurs in the United States, or, more likely, slowly, as occurred in Japan." End quote. Either way, it will erase large amounts of household wealth and will undermine the banks. Professor Pettis concludes by observing, quote, "Obviously, I am not the only person to know this. From what I understand, regulators in Beijing have long had a systematic understanding of the real estate problem in China, which is why they are so worried and were so determined in the past 2 years to clamp down. Unfortunately, however, they don't yet seem to have a systematic understanding of the alternatives, or perhaps they don't yet have the ability to politically recognize the cost. This is probably why there still remains so little clarity on the ultimate adjustment process." End quote. Hey guys, I'd love to hear what you thought about some of the updates we covered in today's episode, so throw your comments below. Always love hearing from you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.